After gathering your materials, we're going to begin making a tessellation for this project. A tessellation is a special type of pattern that doesn't have any spaces or gaps between. This project will be broken into 3 different lessons. For lesson 1, we're going to start off making something called a motif. A motif is just a basic shape that will be repeated over and over to make this tessellation. For lesson 2, we're going to take the motif and we're going to repeat it over to complete a tessellation on a sheet of paper. And for step 3, you're going to just be adding details to your tessellation to make it more interesting. So let's go ahead and get started. For lesson 1, we're going to be making something called a motif. A motif is just a basic shape that's going to be used to repeat over and over again for our tessellation. So for this project, you're going to need to start off with a ruler and a sheet of paper. Just any white sheet of paper would do. Now you need to start off with a square for this project. So right here, I like to make sure that I use the edges of the paper that are already cut because we know those are straight edges. We're going to be making 3-inch squares. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a ruler and I'm just going to measure 3 inches from the top of my paper on the side, making sure the ruler lines up with the paper nice and neatly. I'm starting off with the number 1 right here. So if it's 3 inches long, it should stop at the number 4. So I'm going to put a little dot at the number 4. I'm going to do the same thing on the top of my paper. But since I don't want to flip my ruler around, it doesn't matter what number you start on as long as it's 3 inches. So let's say I start at 10 right here. And I'm going to start right at the corner and line it up at the top of my paper. If I start with 10 and I'm going to subtract 3, that would be at the 7. So I'll put a little dot at the 7. Now, I'm going to also take the ruler again. I'm going to line it up with the dot that I did at the beginning. And it doesn't matter what number you start off with again. I'm going to line it up with the 2 this time. And then I'm going to put a little dot at 5 because that's 3 inches. 2 plus 3 is 5. This will give you the 4 corners you need to make your square. Notice I didn't draw one in the top corner because the paper gives you a corner already. So I'm just going to line these dots up with my ruler now to make a 3-inch square. Now it's important that you line the top of your ruler up, making sure that the edges are touching. And then you're going to connect the dots again. Make sure the side of the ruler touches both dots and that the ruler doesn't move. And then you just simply slide it with your pencil. And there's your 3 by 3 inch square. After you make your 3 by 3 inch square, you're going to cut it out with your scissors. Make sure you cut very carefully because this needs to be straight for this tessellation to work out. After you cut out your square, you can just put this piece of paper to the side and just have your square in front of you. So for lesson 1, like I said, we're going to be making this motif starting from a square that's 3 inches by 3 inches. Now for a tessellation to work, what you're going to do is you're going to be drawing a basic shape from one side of your square towards the inside. So I'm going to start on the bottom and draw any shape you want. Try not to think of making a picture right now. This is just a basic tessellation project, just to show you how these motifs can be used to make this special type of pattern. So at the bottom edge of my square, I'm just going to draw a simple shape. And it can be any type of shape, but I want it to go in towards the inside of my square. So let's say I just do this. After you draw this shape out, you're going to simply cut it out with your scissor. I like doing this immediately, and I'll show you why in a second. If you make any mistakes at this point and you cut out too much or too little, don't worry about it because this project will still work out perfectly fine. So after you cut it out, you're going to take it, don't flip it or rotate it or anything. You're just going to take it straight up and go straight across your paper, making sure the edge, the straight edge, touches the other straight edge of your square, and you're gonna tape it down with a tiny piece of tape. For this demonstration, I'm just gonna use a blue piece of tape just so you can see it, but you can use any tape. You can use clear tape, but I like to use a color tape right now just so I can tell what side of my motif will be used later. Just something to hold it in place, making sure that you leave no gaps or spaces in your motif, but it goes straight across. I'm gonna turn this motif right now, and I'm just gonna pick another side, maybe the top this time, and I'm just gonna try to draw another basic shape that doesn't go over there for right now, because we're gonna do a very basic one. So it could be any type of shape. So I'm gonna make something that looks kind of like a little upside down mountain. So after I draw that, I'm gonna also, and it doesn't matter how you flip it at this point, but I'm gonna cut it out again. And once again, if you cut out too much or too little by accident, it's not gonna matter at this point. You can just keep on going, make sure you don't try to tape it back together. So, after you cut it out, make sure you don't rotate it or turn it around. And you're gonna do what you did the first time, and you're just gonna slide it straight across to the other side. So you gotta make sure it goes straight across. Making sure the edges don't have any gaps or spaces in between them. Oh, that slid a little bit, so I wanna make sure. And you're gonna get a little piece of tape again. And this one's gonna need a smaller piece of tape. And I'm just going to put it down without leaving any spaces or gaps. And that's the beginning of our tessellation, making a motif. In lesson 1, we created this motif for our tessellation project. Now on lesson 2, we're gonna take this motif and trace over it over and over again, leaving no gaps, so we can create a special pattern called a tessellation. So let's get started. So I'm gonna take this motif and get another sheet of paper now. It doesn't matter how you turn your paper. You can turn it landscape or portrait orientation. I'm just gonna do it landscape for this project, for this demonstration. Now we're starting off, notice we only cut out 2 shapes and taped it across to the opposite side on our square. So you should still have some straight edges on this motif. Even though there's some gaps in between, there's interruptions right there, it should still be straight. So what I'm gonna do for this project is start off with some straight edges and put it in one corner of my paper. I like to start down here in the bottom. You can start any corner at the top. Like I said, tessellations are special patterns that will leave no gaps or spaces anyways. So it doesn't even matter if you start in the middle. But since this is a basic demonstration, I want to start it off in a corner to make it a little bit more simple. So I'm going to line this tessellation motif into the corner right here. Making sure the edges, straight edges, meet up with the straight edge of my new sheet of paper. Now notice that part of my motif is sticking off of the paper, and that's fine right now because it's not going to perfectly fit every piece of your tessellation motif being onto your paper. So as long as you have it starting right here in the corner, what you're going to do is you're going to trace what is showing up on the paper. And you're going to fill up your paper with this motif. So I'm just going to trace around right now. And it's okay if you write on your motif by accident. I'm just tracing it. Now before I said that I use this blue tape. The reason why you want to make sure you know what the front side that you're starting with and tracing is because you're going to be doing it on the same side the entire project. So you don't want to flip it around. So I can see the blue tape right now. So I want to make sure as I'm tracing, I always see blue tape on the top. Now, after you finish tracing your motif once, you can see that if I slide my motif over, it should fit perfectly in like a puzzle to the next piece. So once you line them up again, you just continue tracing this way, and it should also fill in and connect when you slide it upwards, like that. So you're just gonna finish this part of the lesson by tracing your motif over and over again until you fill up your entire paper. And remember, parts will be hanging off the paper. Just trace whatever shows up on your paper. After you finish tracing over your motif over and over again, you shouldn't see any gaps. And if you do at this point, just close it up with your pencil, because this isn't going to be perfect since we're doing this by hand. Okay. You can erase any marks that you don't need, or you can fill in with your pencil any you need to fill in. So that will conclude lesson 2 for this tessellation project. Lesson 3 is the final lesson for this project. In lesson 1, we created a motif or a basic shape. In lesson 2, we used that motif to create a special type of pattern called a tessellation, a pattern that doesn't have any empty spaces or gaps between the motifs. Now we're going to start with lesson 3 by using whatever you want to decorate your tessellation pattern. You can use colored pencils, markers, crayons, anything you want, even pencil. But make sure whatever you're using, you have enough of it to finish your pattern over and over again. Because even though you use the motif to make the repeating pattern, if you don't color each thing in an organized manner, then you can really lose that special pattern that we made. So I recommend just limiting yourself to a few colors that you know you have a lot of. For instance, you don't want to use a marker that's about to dry out. And markers are tough because they do run out really quickly. So I suggest using something like a pencil, or you can just do a colored pencil. For this demonstration, I'm just going to demonstrate it with a pencil, doing a very simple pattern in it, just so you can see how this tessellation comes together. I can't wait to see your creative thoughts on this though, and when you turn in your projects, I'm sure the range will be varying from all over the place. So I'm just going to finish off this project in lesson 3 by adding some details to it with a pencil, but you can use whatever you like. Now I just did this project with pencils, but you can easily add color to this. And remember, if you're using color, use it in a repeating, organized way so you don't lose this special tessellation pattern that you just created. Now you can make this as creative as you want, but that will be the end of this project. Now notice that this will not be perfect when you do it because you're using hands once again. Okay, if you're using a computer, you can actually make copies, exact copies, and repeat them over and over again. But since we're doing this by hand, you're going to see little imperfections in it, and that's totally okay. So don't get too bogged down about being perfect with it. As long as you have a general sense that your motif has been repeated over and over in a general sense that looks very similar without having gaps and spaces in between. I hope you enjoyed this project, and I can't wait to see your final projects submitted.